Hello, everyone. My name is Gitika Gorthy, and today I'm very, very excited and honored to be interviewing a very special space champion, Miss Sahba El-Shawa. Miss El-Shawa is a Jordanian-Canadian interdisciplinary researcher originating from Palestine. She's the founder of the Jordan Space Research Initiative, which aims to bridge sustainable development with space exploration and establish an analog research facility in Jordan. Her professional experience includes working as a verification engineer at Intel and as a system AIT engineer in the space industry. She's an active volunteer in the Space Generation Advisory Council, acting as national point of contact for Jordan, as well as co-lead of the Ethics and Human Rights Project Group and the Space for Climate Action Policy Working Group. She is also the national coordinator for the Moon Village Association and its participation of Emerging Space Countries program. She was also the recipient of the Women in Aerospace Young Professional Award in 2021 and the Space Generation Leadership Award in 2022. She's incredibly passionate about outreach and education and has organized space design competitions for students around the world, including in Canada, Europe, and the Middle East. She is a vocal advocate for decoupling defense and space and is committed to creating opportunities for underrepresented communities in space and helping guide the space industry towards a more equitable, ethical, and sustainable future. I remember listening to her speak at a conference, a virtual conference, and was incredibly inspired by her journey and the work that she's doing to inspire so many girls like myself to really envision a future in the space sector. So I'm really excited and welcome Miss El-Shawa. Thank you so much for taking your time to inspire the next generation of aerospace leaders.
Thank you so much, Gitika. Thank you for your kind words and for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, to just kick off our conversation, I first wanted to start off by asking you a little bit more about your typical day. How do you like to usually arrange your schedule?
So I wouldn't say that I actually have a typical day. It really depends on, because I'm involved in a bunch of projects and organizations. And so mostly it's deadline driven. So whatever takes priority is what's coming up soon. These days I've been working on, we're organizing the first analog mission in Jordan, hopefully end of this year. So meeting with potential partners, looking into recruiting more people. And then also with the Space Generation Advisory Council, with the Space for Climate Action Group, we're actually organizing an event at the GLOC conference of the IAF focused on climate change, which is coming up in May. And then also for my PhD research, I'm right now working on finalizing my research abroad period. So hopefully starting that in April, but there's a lot of paperwork that goes along with it. And application deadlines, things like that. So whatever comes up in that day or week is going to be my main focus.
Yeah, I think that, every time I ask this question, it's very interesting to me because I think a majority of the individuals I've interviewed, they always say there is never a typical day, which honestly is so comforting for me because I'm the type of person who likes to get my hands involved in a multiple different things and not really have a structured day. I kind of like to have a more creative schedule. So to be able to see that every day is not the same old routine, but it kind of changes up, I think is always really cool. And I think that's the best part about an industry like aerospace where there are so many different things that you can be involved in. And when I was reading your bio and also just reading your work that you're doing, I was really inspired by how you dedicated a lot of your work towards making space a more accessible place. For me, both of my parents are immigrants from India, and I honestly didn't know what it would be like to have an aerospace career or honestly what the opportunities were in the aerospace sector. And so for me, I was lucky to have an educational experience in the US where I had the opportunity to have a rocketry club that inspired my passion for space. But a lot of students around the world, different parts of America, different parts of the world, don't have that opportunity. And something that I really
Mhm.
admired in the work that you're doing is you founded the Jordan Space Research Initiative to bring space to Jordan. And when I heard this, I was really like just amazed with how you took initiative to start something. And I was curious, could you share a little bit more about what was the inspiration behind founding this organization, as well as what are your future goals and the direction for where you see that this can go?
Yeah, for sure. So, I relate a lot to what you're saying. There's so many people who don't have access to opportunities in space. I was one of those people. When I was studying back in Jordan, there wasn't like an aerospace engineering major. There weren't any student clubs you could get involved in. And so it wasn't until I immigrated to Canada that I was able to start getting involved, like a CubeSat design team, a suborbital rocket design, and actually work with, the space industry. But it took me a very long time, even after that, to be able to get into the space industry because so, back in 2010, I was graduating from high school. I was super into space and so many other things, honestly. I'm a very curious person, but what fascinated me the most about space is just there's so much opportunity for exploration and advancement and just so much that we don't know and can contribute to. But I faced so many barriers that I wasn't able to be part of the people who are exploring this and able to contribute to it. So even after I graduated from my undergrad in Canada, I had been, networking within this Canadian space industry, trying to get a job. And I was basically told that, you haven't been in Canada long enough. You don't have a Canadian citizenship. So because of, security reasons, you can't get a job in this industry. And of course, it depends on the job and how it's classified and all that. But this was a really kind of demotivating, it was a turning point for me because I felt that okay, so it wasn't really about where I was and my geographical location. Like these barriers exist regardless, just because of who you are. And I know that there's so many other people who feel the same way and who maybe are not lucky enough to, I wouldn't say lucky enough to immigrate because also people don't immigrate because they want to leave their home country, right? It's because of a lack of opportunity. It's because of trying to have a better life for themselves, for their children. But in that, if I didn't get my Canadian citizenship, for example, I wouldn't have been able to work at the European Space Agency for my internship. And a lot of the international students during my master's at the International Space University, they weren't even able to apply for those internships. And so this has been kind of a recurring theme that I've been seeing in the space industry. And the more I learned about it after doing my master's, after starting to work in the industry, I felt like our priorities in the space industry are not really in the right place. And it's because there's so many restrictions, there's so many ties with militarization. And I felt that if I wanted to do something for Jordan, which at that point I had been involved in the SJC as the national point of contact and in the Moon Village Association, I didn't want it to be just another volunteer role that I put on my resume, but I can't really help bring things to other people. And the reason I founded JISTI, so the Jordan Space Research Initiative, JISTI is actually an Arabic word that means my bridge. And so I wanted it to be a bridge for people to get involved in space and at the same time, bridging sustainable development with space exploration. So that was the focus of my master's project, was how Jordan can implement the UN Space 2030 agenda. What are our national priorities, the things that challenges that we're facing here on Earth that can be benefited through space. Because, for a country like Jordan, we don't have a space agency, we have very limited resources, and you really need to show that space isn't just, hey, we're going to send someone to the moon for no reason, right? Because why would people invest in that? Why would they feel connected to that? And so that's how the idea of the analog space research came about. Also because in Jordan, we have the desert of Wadi Rum, which is It's like the backdrop for all the Martian movies, and anything that's filmed that's like out in outer space is probably filmed in Jordan. And so that
Oh,
was part of the inspiration too, is like beyond just this aesthetic appeal, it does also give us a unique platform to test our technologies for space. And also part of our, other than the analog research specifically, is the outreach and education. So since 2021, we've been hosting space design competitions for students and young professionals to get involved in. We had a spacesuit and rover design competition, and last year we did a space architecture competition. And what I've seen really is that just this small opportunity that we provided to these people in Jordan has literally changed their lives. Like, it has provided them with a way to get involved in something that they're passionate about when they just did not have that opportunity before. And so they kind of, gets their foot in the door, so they get involved in some space projects, and now they can apply it in other places. And so that really does motivate me to keep moving forward with what we're doing in Jordan.
wow. Yeah, there are so many aspects of what you just shared that I deeply connect with as well. Because when I founded Ignited Thinkers, I have really had the same purpose in mind of just providing an opportunity to someone to really have the opportunity to explore and ignite their passion for space. First kind of starting at the beginning, what you were mentioning about a lot of barriers to entry, especially when it comes to your citizenship or your location in the world. And I know we're starting to see a lot of like emerging space agencies, like the Zimbabwe Space Agency, the Luxembourg Space Agency. There are a lot of smaller countries or countries who were never historically a part of space starting to, open up their agencies and starting to have a presence in space. But it's still very small, and it's so hard for career opportunities for people from all sorts of backgrounds to pursue space careers. I remember when attending a few virtual conferences, people would be like, oh, I'm a student in India, but I'm not sure how I can, I want to work at NASA, or I want an internship at NASA or some other space company. It's like Israel doesn't have as many opportunities. Like, what can I do? And it's always so difficult because space is for all, but we put all these restrictions because of military/government reasons that it's so difficult to enter. So I'm really glad that the Jordan Space Research Institute is really focusing on providing this opportunity for a student or young professional to just get their hands on something and to have an experience outside of school and their education, which I think speaks more
Mhm.
volume. So I think that's incredible and something that aligns with what we're doing as well. So I can definitely see the passion in your eyes. And you're also mentioning a little bit about your research. And when I was reading a little bit about your work, I noticed that you also were working on your PhD around the neurophysiological basis of the overview effect. So on top of being like a communicator and into outreach, you also are very like academically focused in terms of the science behind the overview effect and how you can make it more accessible using virtual reality, which is a conversation that a lot of people are talking about now. So I'm really curious to learn
Mhm.
a little bit more about this research, as well as, how do you see this becoming the future? Or how do you see this virtual reality inspiring a lot of students to potentially look into space or get involved with the space industry?
Yeah, definitely. So it's something that I found this PhD like 10 months into my first real job in the space industry. And at that point, I was feeling like, like I said, it took me a long time to get into the industry, but once I did, I felt like there's so many things that I just didn't like, honestly. And I didn't want to contribute to, military or defense projects, or even projects where you don't even know what they're being used for. And I always kind of was into, the sustainability aspect of things as well. And when I did my internship at the European Space Agency, it was focused on environmental impacts of space activities. And that's when I learned, for something to be sustainable, it's not just reduce carbon emissions. Like, there's so many different things that go into it. And I feel like the climate change problem really is an ideological problem. It's the same problem that's causing the space debris issue and all of these things where we, see nature as this resource for us to consume and just living as if we're not part of nature. And I've always been interested in the human mind as well. Like when I was graduating high school, I was telling you I was interested in a lot of things. I was at the time torn between going to psychology or neuroscience and engineering. I'm happy I ended up doing engineering because I do love it. But at the same time, I felt like there was this whole other field to explore. And so when I came across this PhD, it's an interdisciplinary PhD in sustainable development and climate change. And so I saw it as a really great opportunity to combine all of these different aspects. So the overview effect specifically, I find it fascinating because we don't really understand what it is. And so few people have been able to experience it. And it's nice to say, oh, you see the earth from space and it changes your perspective, it changes everything, and like you see all these wonderful things and it changes your behavior. And so I'm interested in exploring that from like a philosophical perspective. What is it actually about this experience that would cause this change in a person? But at the same time, given my scientific background, and I have worked on a virtual reality project before, and so in my proposal, I had this idea of what if we do both, right? What if you do the philosophical exploration, but also find a way to technologically bring this experience back to Earth and to validate what is actually happening in someone's brain when they're making a decision. Does this actually shift the way that you think? And is it something maybe deeper than what we think it is? It's not just seeing the Earth from space, but also maybe physically being in space, experiencing all these different factors. And so the ultimate goal is like, if we can validate that this experience through virtual reality can cause the same kind of mental shift, that this is really what we need to change people's mentalities and behavior when it comes to the climate crisis, when it comes to social justice, environmental justice on Earth. So that's something I'm really hoping could also be, another outreach tool or communication tool that we can use to address this problem.
Yeah, and also, even incorporating the same technology into video games or, schools. And I think having this really spread in a larger scale could help so many students get involved in the space industry and just inspire everyone to have a more positive impact when it comes to climate and to view it from a different angle. So I definitely agree with what you were mentioning. And when you're talking both about your research as well as your outreach, I really saw your eyes lit up and you're super excited to talk about this topic, which makes me really, really excited. And also you're mentioning a really great point about interdisciplinary careers, like combining your passion in psychology, science, neuroscience, and aerospace together, which I think that's the beauty of space is that it's so interdisciplinary more than people think. So I think, the fact that you brought all this together and I can see your excitement about space. So I'm curious to ask you, what was that aha moment that inspired you to get into the space sector? Because you're mentioning when you were out of high school, you really already had a curiosity for space. And so I'm wondering, like, what was your journey? And when did you realize that this is what I want to pursue?
So I've been asked this question a lot. I can't say that there was a specific moment that like, oh, some people they're like, I saw the Apollo landings on TV and that changed my life. And I'm like, well, not really. I think it's just always this curiosity has always kind of been there. And I've always been very obsessed with the moon. Like ever since I was a kid, looking up at the moon, I don't know what it is. I feel this pull to space really. And I think a lot of it is because I'm very curious about how things work, so not just the universe, just also the human mind and our social systems and everything. And I feel that when I was, like I said, when I was graduating high school, it's like it's this weird period where people expect you to know what you want to do for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And I, as someone who is interested in a lot of things, like being, 17 years old and having to decide like, what is my career going to be? I felt like, so I knew I wanted to kind of go into engineering. Like I said, I was torn between a few different majors, but even within engineering, there's so many different things that you could do. And the reason I got really excited about aerospace specifically, even though I didn't have the opportunity to do aerospace engineering specifically, is I felt like there was just so much more to learn and uncover. And actually, I initially went into mechatronics engineering, so working with robotics. And my goal used to be to work on some space robot that goes off into space to the moon or Mars. And the more I learned about the space industry, the more I faced these barriers. I think my priorities started to shift a little bit from the typical scientific, like as an engineer, seeing that science and engineering is like, it's going to save the world and it's like the best thing you can do. And being like, there's actually a lot of other issues that we're facing, that yes, the science and technology are very helpful and fascinating, but it's so rare to see that kind of perspective combined also with like an ethical or social perspective, or looking into sustainability, looking into social justice, thinking about how in the space industry specifically, like I said, because of the ties with defense, a lot of the work that we do is literally manufacturing weapons and all these things that oppress people on Earth. And then people carry the same mentality into space exploration. And so I feel like that was maybe the aha moment that I had. Wasn't so much as, getting into space, but what exactly I wanted to do in the space industry. And I think a lot of that stemmed from my background as a Palestinian and feeling that I couldn't even be open about my identity because it was seen as this political statement in a political field like space, and limiting my job opportunities because of my citizenship or where I was. And it just felt like something that really needed to be tackled more so than the technological advancements, because there's a lot of brilliant minds working on that. About the other side of the social advancement.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you froze for just a second there, but I think I got like the gist of what you were trying to say. It's so important to recognize that there is more than just these, typical STEM careers or aerospace engineering careers that we can look at, and there's so much more to space. But even what you were mentioning about what inspired you about space, that innate curiosity and how there wasn't a defining moment, but it was something that you're always intrigued by, is actually something a lot of students can relate with, because not all of us were born for the Apollo mission or were there to witness every rocket launch, or there wasn't a movie that inspired us, but sometimes it's just that curiosity of like what's there, are there aliens, what is the moon, like what's on the moon, just like questions like that as kids that get us excited about space. And I think when you were mentioning that out of high school at 17, you were intrigued by so many different careers, I think that just speaks to how curious of a person you are. And it's not like a specific industry was attracting you, but it was more of trying to solve those questions or try to come up with solutions to answer those challenging questions. And I was like a strong, firm believer that those who are the most curious really want to, dip their feet in a lot of different things just because they're naturally curious to learn and like solve problems. So I think that's really great. And what you were mentioning about trying to solve problems using the space sector is something that we need to bring attention to. A lot of people think space is just to send humans to space and create a lot of buzz around space exploration, but there are a lot of technological advancements that come from it that can benefit a lot of us here today, including protecting our planet. So you mentioned another really good point, that space is for Earth and it's for humanity. And throughout this obstacle of pursuing your space career, did you have obstacles? And if so, how were you able to overcome these obstacles?
Um, yeah, so I think the main obstacle was this huge barrier to entry. I don't think it's really, I mean, for a lot of people, it is the case that, you know, it takes a really long time to get into this industry. And not because they're not talented or smart or have ambitions, but because there are just so many restrictions on it. Um, I think, you know, for me, it was really right after I graduated from my undergrad and not being able to work in the space industry. That's when I started working at Intel, and um, I was there for 2 years. And for a lot of people, that was like, okay, you're set, you know, like you're working at a great company. Why would you leave? And I just still felt, you know, space calling to me. Like I really just wanted to make it happen. And so when I left Canada to go to the International Space University to do my master's there, I think that also opened up a lot of opportunities. But again, like I said, if I wasn't a Canadian citizen at that time, I would not have been able to get access to a lot of these opportunities as well. And so that's kind of what drives me to try and, you know, change these obstacles for other people. And I think other than kind of these restrictions and limitations that we have on, you know, access, it's also a huge mental obstacle to overcome, because you do feel like, I mean, a lot of people, you know, experience imposter syndrome, but it's so much more amplified too when, you know, the field you're in, the people you're around are nothing like you, and they also don't understand maybe your priorities either. Or you know, I really struggled with this since I started my master's, and as soon as I moved to Europe, really, is this idea that I didn't feel that I could openly share that I was a Palestinian, which is, you know, to me it's ridiculous now because I'm very vocal about it, especially in the space industry. But I was really scared that in addition to all the barriers that I was already facing, that me being vocal about, you know, who I am and why we need to change things would bar me from a lot of other opportunities, because space is a very political field. And I think most people don't realize that because they focus mostly on the, you know, the cool, like technological advancements. So, you know, reusable rockets, we're going to the moon. It's all so exciting. But there's so much geopolitical stuff happening behind the surface. And I think that's been one of the biggest kind of mental shifts that I've had to overcome, in terms of realizing that, you know, if you're not being true to who you are, you're never going to be comfortable in those spaces. And the people who come after you won't be comfortable either, because they won't see anyone talking about it. And so it just becomes this normalized way of being. Uh, and I would say that honestly, for me, at least in the past couple of years, has been the biggest challenge for me to overcome internally, because, you know, externally, there's still going to be people who don't agree with you, or who are not going to give you a certain opportunity because they don't like what you're saying, especially if you're speaking out against defense and militarization, which is, you know, a huge part of our industry. But I think for me, it was realizing that I would rather not work with people like that. I would rather not take those opportunities if it meant that, you know, I had to contribute to things that I did not feel aligned with my values.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, really, first of all, thank you for being so honest and open about that. I feel like it's really hard for a lot of individuals to understand where you're coming from, but just to hear you express that, I think is so valuable and so important, because a lot of girls can maybe relate with what you're saying, or a lot of students can relate with what you're saying today. So I know it can, for anyone who's listening who can relate, I know it definitely helps them kind of navigate this space. And so really thank you for sharing. I think, you know, this space industry has, of course, like you mentioned, been very historically space military focused, and that's how the space race and all the countries competing to be the first on the moon, the first to hopefully send humans to Mars. I don't know. There's a lot of competition, and now I think it's starting to become more privatized between companies, which is still competition, but I think it's a better competition because it's not against countries necessarily. And hopefully that starts opening up more doors to people with different citizenships or nationalities to be able to work in these different space companies. So really, thank you for mentioning that point. And I think we're starting to really get away from that really protective. We still have a long way to go, but I think we're starting to acknowledge things we've done wrongly in the past, and we're starting to be more open-minded. We're starting to think about the accessibility point. We're starting to think about DEI and A accessibility, which I think is critical. So hopefully we're moving in the right direction. We still have a long way to go, but I think with people like you who are speaking up and sharing what is important to you. I think, I'm sorry that you had to go through that, but also I'm so glad that you're standing up now and you're speaking for what you believe is true. And, hearing your journey so far and hearing about your research, your background, and your work, I'm sure you've had many, life lessons at a very young age that could be beneficial to so many students. And so, my last and final question I wanted to ask you is, what final piece of advice do you have for young students regarding a pursuit of a passion in aerospace, STEM, really just any career? A piece of advice you wish you knew when you were coming out of college or maybe entering the aerospace field?
I think the main one is something we touched upon very briefly, but this idea of, interdisciplinary interests and research. It's very often that you hear like, oh, this person, they have too many interests, they're doing too many things, they're not focused, they're not committed to like one specific thing. And some people do see that as a weakness, but I honestly see it as the biggest strength, because that is where all of the breakthroughs happen. You are not going to, advance humanity and society and everything we're trying to do in space exploration if you don't have an interdisciplinary mindset. And I think the problem that a lot of people face is, like I said, very early on, at a very young age, you're forced to kind of pick one thing and stick to it, or you feel like, oh, I've already committed so much time to getting this degree, it would be a waste of that time if I tried to do something else now, or if my goals shift or my priorities shifted. But I don't see any of it as you're not wasting your time by learning something, because everything you learn is going to contribute to, developing your interests, developing your passions, and leading you in the right direction for you. Because that's another thing, like, you're not, some people are very lucky and they, the perfect job for them already exists out there, or the perfect role or organization. But for a lot of people, it's hard to put them in that box. And I feel, I always felt like I was one of those people and I didn't really know what to do, because I felt like I was being pressured, this like societal pressure to just pick something and stick to it. And it's like, well, I don't want to, like everything that I'm doing now is interdisciplinary. Even my work with the Jordan Space Research Initiative is focusing on several aspects of space exploration. And I think that's another thing, is like, if you don't find those opportunities, if you don't find those jobs or organizations, chances are there are other people also looking for what you want. And so you should go ahead and make it happen. Create that new organization, create a new opportunity, for yourself, also for other people who have these interests, to give them that, that thing that you didn't have when you were their age. And it is really, it's a very fulfilling journey to go on, especially once you start forming this community of people with like-minded interests.
I think that was powerfully said and really just encapsulated the entirety of the interview, especially when you were mentioning about just do it. Don't let anyone tell you you can't do it. If you have an interdisciplinary career that doesn't seem to exist, still pursue it because I'm sure you can be the first person who has that job. I remember when I first told people, I was like, oh, I'm interested in space medicine, which there are a few space medicine professionals out there, but a lot of people in my community didn't know what that was. And they were like, are you sure that's a real career? And I would have to a lot of times be like, yes, it is. Trust me, it's a career. And I'm really passionate about it. So I want to do it. And I think it's all about taking that leap of faith and stepping out of your comfort zone and pursuing those unconventional careers because, hey, in the next 10 years, maybe that will be the future realistic, common career. Who knows? So I think
Mhm.
it's so important to just follow your passions, find that perfect job. Don't adjust and think that you have to go one direction or another. Combine all of your interests and your pursuits to find that dream goal. And especially what you're saying at the end about filling that gap, your own story will tell you, your own journey will tell you a lot about what are the gaps in this world? Like, what do we need to
Yeah.
fix to create a better future? And find those gaps and fill those gaps, just like the Jordan Research Space Institute is doing in terms of filling that gap that you saw in your own journey and opening doors to hundreds and thousands of students in Jordan and maybe even other Middle Eastern countries. So, really, I want to thank you so much for taking your time today to share your journey and your work with us. I'm always so inspired by the work you're doing, and I'm really re energized to keep doing what I'm doing as well. And I think your journey helped a lot of girls like myself really believe in themselves and also believe that you can pursue a career that might seem unconventional or to pursue a path that you think is important. So, thank you so much for your time, and hopefully, we'll be able to meet in person one day.
Thank you so much. It was really great to meet you, and thank you for all the great work you're doing with this platform. It's really inspiring to see as well.
Thank you.